This is a very brief introduction. It's a story before you get on to see the role play of how we carry out a cultural formulation. The first of all, as you're familiar with, is the famous DSM-4 cultural formulation approach, where Roland Littlewood was involved as one of the expert advisors. And rather interestingly, this particular approach was developed in response to concerns expressed about black and minority ethnic patients in North America, and interestingly remains within the appendix of the diagnostic manual. The second approach, which is based upon the work that we have been doing at the Unit of Clinical Anthropology at UCL, which includes my colleagues Roland Littlewood and Simon Dean, has been systematically examining issues of marginality and its relationship to the center. And if you were to take these two dimensions, one which I might call as a more geographical one, of a group of people who might be dislocated either by choice or forced, and the other at the other end who are stagnant and haven't moved. And you have the second axis of people who might be, through their cultural identity, either overconnected or underconnected as extreme ends. We have a situation of four quadrants, and it's a very simplistic way to illustrate just some of the theoretical issues that would come through when you watch the role play. You then have four quadrants of people, but our particular interest in this session has been to examine the role of experience of people who are in the psychiatric settings, admitted in locked wards and being treated compulsorily against their wish. The right upper quadrant is the quadrant which I would consider as the most common quadrant, where people whom we have been treating and looking after fall. And some of these ideas that came about are connected with how do we deal and address the experience of suffering, where the degree of connectedness and location is important and might be of interest to a clinician who may work with them, but also who might want to engage. And as you know, that there is a very big question about how can we engage with certain subgroups of the population, not just within the UK and Europe, but in other parts of the world. I show this arrow in the middle as a way of illustrating that there are alliances that develop between various groups, and that plot ideas of well-being. There's no particular idealized center or direction, nor are these groups static. They might move from one position to another. This idea of connectedness moves as we get older or shift our positions. So the setting that you're going to see in this role play is an inner London locked psychiatric unit, and this is how it was at the start of the project. We would be able to share with you a situation which involves a vignette, which perhaps I can put up on the screen.
I have come in this morning to be told about an admission which came in late last night, and I shall read out briefly the notes made available to me by my clinical team. Samrat is a 35-year-old man with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. He has been detained under the British Mental Health Act in an inner London psychiatric hospital. At the time of admission, it was reported that Samrat was non-communicative, answering in monosyllables, and was not willing to engage. He was brought to the attention of community mental health services after being found urinating on the steps of the British Museum. He explained to the police that he did not think this was inappropriate. Subsequently, he was assessed by 2 duty psychiatrists and a duty social worker, who concluded that given his history and behavior, it was likely that he had a relapse of schizophrenia and needed hospital admission for further treatment. The duty social worker also thought that in view of his poor communication, he would benefit from a Bangladeshi interpreter. Few days prior to his admission, it was reported in the case files that Samrat was becoming aggressive and threatened his community psychiatric nurse. He was also reported to be not eating and becoming mute. At the time of his admission late last night, he was described as malodorous and disheveled. It appeared that he was responding to auditory hallucinations. He appeared blunted in his mood and lacked insight into his illness. Samrat is born and brought up in Kolkata. Little is known about his family. He comes from a middle-class background. He came to England when he was 23 years old to study English literature. There is no family history of psychiatric illness. Apart from occasional telephone contact with his family, there is no family involvement. Now, the issues for me as I come in to see this patient on the ward this morning and for my clinical team are three. The first is a history of poor engagement with mental health services, as you've just heard. The second is a poor compliance with psychiatric medication. And the third is there seems to be a limited understanding of Samrat's problems by the community mental health team because of his poor communication.
Doctor, I'm sorry to disturb you this time. If we've got a new patient, police have just brought him in. Would you be able to see him? We're not sure what to do with him.
No, I'm on call. What else do you know about him?
Well, he was relieving himself on the steps of the British Museum, seen by a passing police constable, and grabbed him, and then they sort of felt he had a mental health problem, and checking him up they found he had a mental health record, so they brought him here on to the police station.
Okay. What's his name?
Mr. Ali.
Okay. Where's he from? Do you know where he's from?
Somewhere, some Asian country, I'm not sure.
Okay. Would he need an interpreter?
Or maybe it might be helpful.
Right.
Speaking maybe try Bangladeshi.
Okay. He seems calm enough.
Sorry?
He seems calm enough.
I'll be careful.
Okay. Okay. Will you sit in with me, do you think?
Well, I've got a lot to do. Do you really need me?
If he's calm enough.
I think he's calm enough. Maybe, I would say.
Okay, but you'll be around anyway.
I'm just outside doing some office work.
Okay. So you bring him in?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay.
Come on. Hi, Mr. Ivy, let's come in. This is the doctor who's going to see you now.
And Mr. Ali? Mr. Ali? Hello, I'm Dr. Jones.
We'll show you now, doctor.
Yes, I'll just ask him to sit down here. Mr. Ali, I'll just ask you to sit down here if that's all right.
Good luck.
Fuck off! Mr. Ali, can I ask you to sit down? I just need to ask you some questions about how you're feeling. I'll ask you to sit down here.
You sit down.
I'll sit down here. Well, you're all right sitting here, are you? I've sat down now. Mr. Ali, how are you feeling?
Don't ask the same questions all over again.
you've been to this hospital before?
All black people are the same. Black doctor. Same questions. I saw a black doctor in A&E.
Mr. Ali, what did the black doctor say to you, the one you saw in A&E?
Nothing. Admitted me.
Okay. How did you come to be admitted this time? Can you tell me about that?
Don't ask the same questions. It's all there in my notes. You can see it.
Okay, I'll grab your notes later and take a look at them. The bit that wouldn't be in your notes now would be about today. Can I ask you about today? What happened today? I can see you're looking quite uncomfortable. You're looking around. Is there anything that's worrying you?
I want to go.
Where do you want to go?
Home.
Okay. You were brought here on a section, weren't you? Mr. Ali, before you go home, we need to do a bit more of an assessment. Mr. Ali, you're on some medication, are you? Mr. Ali, can I ask you about your mood? I need to ask you about your thoughts and your mood.
I'm not Ali. You see, you're behaving like a normal black doctor. You don't even know my name properly.
Okay, can I ask you your full name and ask you to spell it out for me?
My name is Shomrat Sengupta.
Can you spell that out for me?
Shomrat. S-H-O-M-R-A-T.
S-H-O-M-R-A-T. And your surname?
Sengupta.
And what would you like me to call you? And what would you like me to call you?
Why is the door closed?
The reason why it's closed is so that we can have some privacy while we're talking. How does it make you feel, the door being closed?
I don't like it.
Why do you say that?
I feel uncomfortable with you. You're messing up with my thoughts, you know?
I'm sorry that you feel like that. Can I just ask you whether you're on medication?
You should know, you're a doctor.
Okay, I'll take a look at your notes and find out exactly what medication you're on. So what would you like to do now?
I want to go.
Unfortunately, you won't be able to go now because you're on a section. I'll get one of the nurses to speak to you about your rights under the Mental Health Act. I know you said you wanted to go and you're looking tired. Do you mind if I ask you a little bit about your thoughts before you go?
You are messing up with my thoughts.
Why do you say that?
Because I think You're a black bitch.
I don't think that sounds quite harsh to say that. I think we'll want you to have some medication, and tomorrow we'll there'll be a ward round where the consultant will see you. I'll ask the nurse to come and speak to you now. Is that all right, Mr. Sengupta?
Have you finished, Doctor?
Mr. Sengupta appears he appears quite agitated, so I think he might need to have some medication, and he'll need to be discussed in the ward round tomorrow.
Would you guys have the medication?
I would,
Right.
yes.
I don't want to have some medication. I don't want some medication.
Let's just give it a
You
couple
fuck
of
off!
seconds.
You don't even know my name!
His name is Mr. Sengupta.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Sengupta. Come on, I'll give you a cup of tea.
Mr. Sengupta, thank you for talking to me. Thank you for
And
talking.
you can go to bed. Doctor to see you. It's Miss Sally, Doctor.
Hello, Mr. Shamrat.
Yeah.
How are you? My name is Dr. Jadhav. Nice to meet you. Do please come in and have a seat. Mr. Shamrat, would it be alright if I were to introduce myself?
Do you need me, Doctor?
Yes, please, do have a seat. We're going
We've
to be
got a
having...
lot of P49s to finish off, are you sure?
Yes, please, have a seat. We're going to have a very interesting cultural conversation, and maybe it might open up some ways to help us understand how we could help Mr. Shamrat better. Because as you know, he's been admitted from the community, and his case notes say that he's not engaged well and doesn't take his medication, and we don't understand his problems well enough. You might probably find it
Thank you,
useful.
not too long, please.
Thank you. Shamrat, this is a slightly unusual way to introduce myself. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Sushrut Jadhav. I work as a consultant psychiatrist on this ward. Originally, I am from a part of the world that you might be familiar with. I'm from India originally. I was born on this map that you can see in the city of Mumbai. Have you heard of Mumbai?
Yes, I have.
I did my medical graduation in Mumbai and then subsequently went over to the city of Bangalore to do my psychiatric training.
I've been to Bangalore.
Have you?
Yes.
But I trained as a psychiatrist in Bangalore and then came over to London about 10 years ago, where I trained as an anthropologist. Would you like to introduce yourself through the map?
You would like me to introduce myself through the map?
Yes, please.
That's unusual.
Well, it's a way to understand our journeys, where we've come from, and hear your story.
I was born and brought up in Calcutta and came to England when I was 23.
Oh, I see.
I came to England to study English literature.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Coventry. Is Coventry there? Coventry must be
Which of the
somewhere
cities
there.
you moved around? Right. How long ago was that?
It was about 10 years ago.
Okay, so that makes you 33 now. 35.
Yes.
Case notes here say you're 35 years old.
Yes.
Maybe I'll begin a little bit because there seemed to be some confusion about your name.
There is lot of confusion. There's lot of confusion.
What's the matter, Mr. Ali?
Have you seen that? What are you sitting here for?
Doctor Hospital.
Fuck off!
My case notes say, David, that he's known as Samrat.
We call him all Mr. Ali, makes him feel at home.
Oh, I see.
No?
Don't be silly. I'm not Ali. You keep calling me Ali. You don't even know my name properly. Oh, ridiculous.
Tell us your full name. I'm interested in knowing your name.
Ridiculous.
Would you like to give me your name?
My name is Shomrat. Shomrat Sengupta.
Oh, I see. And is this how you pronounce it?
Yes. Ideally, I pronounce it as Shomrat Sengupta.
That's nice because very many times people come from abroad and they anglicize their names. Some of them like it, some of them don't like it. How would you like me to call you?
Shomrat.
Shomrat. And would it be correct if I pronounce your surname, your family name as Sengupta?
Yes.
All right. I'm interested in knowing what your first name means to you. What does Shamrat mean? Is that a difficult question?
Shomrat means emperor. And look at my condition. When I was young, people used to say, "Oh, which country do you rule, son?"
Who gave you this name?
My father. I laugh when people ask the meaning of my name.
Must be very difficult, as you mentioned, your name means that you are an emperor, and to be brought here to a locked ward against your wish. What about your surname, Sengupta, your family name? What does that mean?
It's about the caste in India. Sengupta comes from Guptas, which mean that we are Vaidyas, meaning doctor class.
Oh, I see. Yes, Vaidyas.
Yes.
Yes.
We are very proud of being Guptas, you see.
Yes, I gather you are aware of your caste identity, and I wondered whether you might be curious about my caste identity. We'll have a chance to talk about it.
You want to tell me
later
about
on.
your class?
Yes, my caste.
Caste?
Because I think it perhaps matters to you as much as it matters to me, and it's important that we get to speak about it.
That's very strange. Shh. He's sitting here.
What's the matter?
I'm sorry, I hope I haven't lost you just to bring you in. We're having a conversation to try and understand Mr. Sengupta, and he was telling us about his caste background. And I think it's very important to recognize how the identities of the clinician and the patient can shape what happens. If he were to talk to others about it, it might make people understand me better. As a clinician and where I come from and my cultural identity. I'm curious to know how you describe your own cultural identity.
Yes. I'm a Bengali, but I'm a Bengali from West Bengal, from Calcutta.
Oh, I see. It's interesting because the case notes have been given say that the duty social worker thought you might benefit from a Bangladeshi interpreter because there was poor communication.
Yes. You see, this is the problem. I can speak English perfectly well.
Help me understand what happened.
They thought that because I was Bengali, I am Bangladeshi. They thought I was from Sylhet.
Oh, I see.
That's the common mistake people make. But Bangladeshi and Bengalis from Calcutta are different.
I see.
The British divided our country, but they didn't understand now the division, what it means.
Mr. Shen Gupta, what languages do you speak?
I speak 3 languages. I speak Bengali, a little bit of Hindi. I can read and write Hindi slowly. And of course English.
Would you be happy if we were to have this conversation in English?
Yeah. I'm perfectly fine in English. The reason why they felt that I needed an interpreter is because I didn't want to talk to them.
I see. And what might that be due to?
They don't understand me. I'm not interested in talking to them, as they're not interested in me.
What might it take for them to be interested in you?
Know me as a person.
Because there has been confusion about your name, may I clarify, do you belong to any particular religion?
My parents are Hindus, but I don't follow a religion.
Let's talk a little bit about Britain and British culture. We think a lot of people connect their personal problems with their position in British society. Now, this might not necessarily apply to yourself. Nevertheless, I'm keen to hear a little bit more about your views on this.
At first, when I came to England, I was fine. There was no problem. I liked to know the new culture. I was fine. But the first time I experienced some maybe racism or some kind of discrimination was when I went to extend my visa. The visa officer told me to get lost just because I didn't understand his accent.
Oh, I see. Even though you speak English perfectly fluently.
I thought I did. But now, after I've become unwell, it's my cultural background, my race, and on top of that, my mental illness.
If I were to ask you with these experiences that you've shared with me, what might it take for you to feel part of this society?
Change my color. Last night, there was a black doctor. She was not interested in me. She was only interested in giving me medication, the same sort of questions. Tell me about your thoughts, voices. Rubbish.
I'm interested more in understanding you as a person, and as part of that, I want to understand more about your experiences of racism and marginalization. You talked a little bit about going to the Home Office. Tell me a little bit more about your experience with the mental health services.
Oh. What happened last night is an example of my experience with mental health services. They didn't understand me. I wasn't unwell. I was just angry. That's why I didn't want to talk to them. But they won't understand that.
I'm interested in hearing more about this. Just like doctors and nurses have their own ways of understanding people's problems, people such as yourself may also have their own views. And I would like to hear more about this. What is it that troubles you most about your problem?
The side effects. Look, what happened to me? All these medication. People can recognize me, see me from a distance. They can see that I've got mental health difficulties.
We would want to talk about these side effects soon. But I need to understand how you understand your problem a bit more in detail. If you were back home in Calcutta, what name might people give to the problem that you are having?
I think if I tell them about the computers messing up my thoughts, they will, I suppose, call me Pagol.
Pagol. Is that a Bengali name?
Yes.
And what does Pagol mean to you?
Mad.
I see.
But Pagol becomes a Pagol with all these side effects.
Yes.
My brain is perfectly fine. But look at this.
What do you think caused your Pagol?
I don't know.
Perhaps I should say, what is it made you Pagol?
I don't know.
When do you think this started?
When I had some difficulties in Coventry University, I failed my exam.
And what does it do to you when these difficulties started?
It messes up my thoughts. But more than that are the side effects of medication. I hate it. I hate it.
How do these difficulties mess up your thoughts? I'm interested in hearing more. What are your views on that?
I can't think straight.
Right. Is it possible that sometimes as a result of that you might misinterpret or misunderstand what people say to you?
I don't know.
Right.
Can I have a break? Can I have a cigarette?
Sure, of course, very much. Would you like to continue this conversation?
Yes, I think this is helpful. For the first time you are talking about me. You talk about the maps. You're interested in me as a person. Yes, I would like to come back.
Oh, thank you.
You
very
have to
much.
go into the garden. We can't smoke here.
Will that be all right with you?
Yeah, can I have a break?
Yes, please. David, would you mind? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Yeah, I'll come back.
Bye-bye.
Who knows what's smoking now?
I'll ask Scott now to perhaps give us his reflections on what he thinks about this project. Scott was a user consultant right throughout the study and has been very independent but also very supportive of what we have done.
Universally, almost, the patients were fascinated by the idea and supportive of the approach, because what patients so often told me when I ran a patient organisation was, the worst thing about it is nobody ever talks to me. And what they mean, actually, they don't mean nobody talks to them, because the poor little nurses have to talk to them sometime during the day to write up their notes. What they mean is nobody ever holds a meaningful conversation. They're not interested in me, they're just interested in doing something which the system requires them to do. The second group of people we presented it to were the staff. And having presented it to patients on the one occasion, I think we presented it in November to patients and the staff in the January or February, the overwhelming discontent of the staff about it was really, had to be seen to be believed. It's hard to describe to you because we've been, you know, they were antagonistic, they didn't want it to happen, they thought it was, we were going to spy on their practice, they thought it was a means of saying to them, they're doing the wrong thing. And they weren't in the slightest bit interested, as far as I could tell, about whether it would be beneficial to the patients they were looking after. It's odd that, because nominally this study had huge support from the management of the trust down the road, and they thought that it was, they were entranced by it and thought that it was interesting and innovative. The truth is, they didn't think well, they might have thought those things, I don't know, I can't see inside their heads, but what they really wanted, because at that time the Rocky Bennett report had come out, and the position of young black males, particularly in the mental health services, had become enhanced. And the Department of Health had developed a program called Developing Race Equality. The Trust wanted to find some method of saying it had a system which actually helped them. They could do this. They could say, we've got it. We know how to provide race equality. And along the way, and it's fascinating, and Sushrut could tell you many more stories than I could, all they really wanted was, they weren't interested in the research at all. They wanted to know how quickly it can be rolled out. We must roll it out, we must roll it out. And we want a toolkit. We want a toolkit. You've got the toolkit. It's the toolkit which is important. The cultural competency toolkit is really the thing that they wanted. But what has been said by people who use the services is, whenever they've seen it, that it's, for them it's a different way of engaging, and it provides a way of allowing them to tell their stories. And I think perhaps the very last thing I should say, I think Sushrut alluded to it, is actually, although the money was given to look at the position of specifically young black males, actually we have found that the cultural formulation applies to everyone, whether you're white, black, male or female. So it isn't a fix in the sense that you can, it's specific to the problems of young black males. It may be a fix in the sense that it applies to everyone.
We have about 10 minutes time left in the theater, and we are very willing to take questions.
I was pleased to hear that you included white, male subjects. It seems to me that negotiating cross-ethnicity is a very important matter, and you've shown the way how to move forwards on that. But increasingly, negotiating across class is an issue. So there's the issue of social class, which needs to be addressed, I think, as much as ethnicity. Now, just a comment of appreciation, really. I think Roland's had to leave early, but when Roland was really a pioneer in all this, as all of you will know. And when he first came to work with us, his way, this was in Hackney, his way of establishing a rapport with people, which he did really under his own initiative, was to sit down with them, and he and the patient would both start drawing and painting and using crayons and so on, and then discuss what they were drawing and painting. And that worked extremely well as a way of establishing. This wasn't for diagnostic purposes, it was to establish a rapport. Now, by the 70s, when Roland was well established in psychiatry, late 70s, we'd reached the stage portrayed in Blue Orange, played by Joe Pownell. I don't know if you've seen it, which is quite a nice caricature of transcultural sensitivity, but extremely patronizing, which we'd reached by the time Sushrut came to work with us, which would have been in the 80s. I see that you've moved on, really thanks to this initiative, enormously since the rather condescending, patronizing, transcultural attitude that we psychiatrists, except Roland, I have to say, used to have. So that was a word of appreciation. But if you could mention something about class, I'd be grateful.
In real life, my experience in dealing with people is actually they're not so much interested in your class, unless you want to portray it as I did clearly. They're interested in your humanity. And I think that what this approach shows is humanity, and I think that overcomes class. You and I can have a long conversation about the British class system, and we'll be here till both of us are getting on. We'll both be dead before it finishes. I know that to be true. But in these circumstances, I think that actually the approach is about the humanity of the approach, and not about the class, perhaps, of the psychiatrist or indeed the recipient.
I might just want to add very briefly, very quickly, that when I showed the first starting slide about experiences of marginality and centrality, in that sense, almost all of us have multiple identities. In some identities we are central, in other identities we are marginal. And it is trying to establish those links across that might open up the issue of class to see if there are strands where the clinician's experience of marginality might connect to the subject's experience of centrality, and vice versa. So we are in some spaces marginal, but in other spaces very central, and that applies both ways. So I found that when we were working with people in that sense, for many patients who saw me perhaps as an Indian, that became an interesting way to counterpose with issues of social class, which were different, where I became an outsider and in some ways marginal. But it's that dialogue between the two that opened up and didn't fix it on just a matter of a class difference.
Does CF, in terms of the way it generates more information, help clinicians maybe engage with patients' relatives and significant others when patients wish them to be involved, do you think?
When you ask the question, does it help improve the relationship? A single interview wouldn't, but what it does is it opens up and sets off a process of an inquiry and a consciousness that establishes a relationship not just between the individuals concerned, but between the service and the community. And the question is, in how far can it be taken? There is no limit to it. It is about individual clinicians, their curiosity, as well as ways in which wider issues. One might argue that this can generate a whole lot of more work because it opens up issues that can't be addressed within a hospital setting. But maybe that acknowledgement is necessary such that then there could be ways to think about it, rather than to pigeonhole people's suffering within a particular box and that edits out these wider issues.
The second thing was, I was interested, particularly Scott, what you were talking about in terms of when you do research somewhere, how staff feel very much like they're being put up under a microscope. I too have to do an enormous amount of groundwork before I start any project, and it's always an issue. I was interested to hear whether you thought the cultural consultation service that was set up as a result of an outcome of the project helped to relieve some of the burden of the fears of racism that staff have in their practice, which are so unproductive, I think, for everybody.
The service just started after the project finished, which was last year, and so far the nature of consultations have been so fascinating that we won't have the time, but what has often happened is a the request is about a cultural issue, but the resolution has been a straightforward organic problem. So it's quite interesting how we decide what the problem is and how to name it. For me, what's also interesting is that when you ask the question of culture, relating to what Scott was saying earlier, in research, one has to be very well prepared to expect something that is unknown, and where it goes and how it can hit back. And so the consequences to the team who have had to take on a huge brunt of the consequences of the research is one part of it. But in the actual service, it's far too early. One of the reasons being that the issue is still a pressure on clinicians to somehow change something happening very fast, and to somehow offer that as a fix. And that can't be done. What can be done is to open up and allow a new way of thinking for them, rather than a solution to a problem that is presented. So it's a continuing process, and we're hoping that it will go in the direction where you do not necessarily need a separate consultation service, but for people to develop a certain kind of self-reflexivity. And so we come back to standard, established, good mental health care that existed, but at some stage what has happened that we have transformed with the language of psychiatry has impacted upon us in a way that our identities have become very cold and very non-therapeutic, but become perhaps also more administrative.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm a medical anthropology student in David's department. I just, very quick question, be really interested in knowing more about the actual interview itself and some of the dynamics there. How, for example, how predetermined are some of the questions, and how sort of open and are you to adapting, and what's the mix and the balance? I mean, if it goes on for about an hour and a half, there's a lot of stuff going on here. So I'd just be interested.
Yeah, for broad categories, the very first starting point, unlike a traditional psychiatric history taking, is presenting symptoms and the history of presenting illness, etc. What we decided to do was we start talking to them and want to know about their cultural identity. But before we do that, there is a need for a symbolic permission for them to be able to speak, and which is why it's important for the clinician to introduce themselves through their cultural identity, which allows for then a systematic inquiry into the meaning of their names, where it comes from, and who gave them that, and that opens up a very rich family history that we would otherwise not have known, and which is why we got this additional data, even though doctors were taking family histories, but we couldn't get all of it. And the first section, therefore, in addition to components of cultural identity, include how do they see themselves, what are their experiences of discrimination and stigma. If they were part of British society, do they feel they belong? If not, what might it take to belong? And if they are outsiders, would they prefer to remain outsiders? And then that gradually moves more in the direction of then the stigma of their suffering. And then it moves into the next section, which is to identify their cultural explanations for their problem. And then we move on to using body maps to ask them to plot how they see their suffering within their body with respect to how it works, but also plot the social journey of their medication. And it gives us interesting ideas about how we might then start intervening or establish newer dialogues. And it finishes off with a very important section that inquires into whether the nature of the cultural relationship between the clinician and the subject has anything to do with their care.
Poor people are poor people, and they don't understand. A man's got to make whatever he wants and take it with his own hands. Poor people stay poor people, and they never get to see. Someone's got to win in the human race. If it isn't you, then it has to be me. So smile while you're making it. Laugh while you're taking it. Even though you're faking it, nobody's gonna know. Nobody's gonna know. No use mumbling, it's no use grumbling. Life just isn't fair. There's no easy days, there's no easy ways. Just get out there and do it. And sing, and they'll sing your song. Laugh while you're getting on. Smile and they'll strangle